On the orange sofa, we're back with Jackie Lynch, registered nutritional therapist, who has come to chat today mainly about Jo's circumstances and her little mishap she had the other day, about keeping Jo's lovely bones. Jo, what happened to you?
Lovely link, and about the lovely bones. A major accident that involved a paving stone in the garden. The good news is, when I went off to casualty, I asked the doctor about my bones, because obviously being 53, I thought osteoporosis, and I'd already whispered it in my ear, as had my husband. The doctor looked at the x-ray and said, oh, you've got lovely bones. So I took the compliment, and I'd like to keep them that way. Jackie's going to tell us how to keep them lovely.
Great, thank you. Well, let's hope we can manage that. I thought it might help to start out by just explaining a little bit about how bone's structured and how it works. So there's the outer layer, which is called the cortical layer, which is the hard, dense substance. Now, that renews itself roughly every 10 to 12 years completely. And then you've got the inner layer, which is a spongy layer called the trabecular layer, which has a faster turnover and renews itself every 2 to 3 years. And amongst all of that, you've got a framework of collagen, which provides the flexibility, because we don't think of bones as flexible, but actually they are. And there's also calcium and phosphorus in there, which helps make sure the bones stay nice and strong. Now, it's incredibly important that the bones renew themselves, because old bone is weak. So, Mother Nature has a great way of making sure that we're looking after ourselves, that our body is sorting everything out, which is why bones will renew themselves. And there are two key bone cells that will do that. You've got osteoclasts that will break down the bone, and you've got osteoblasts that will then build it back up again.
The clasts and the blasts. Okay, sounds like a punk band.
So if you think of blast as in building, then B for building, that's how I try and remember it, if that helps. So it's incredibly important as women move towards the menopause to understand what's going on with our bones, because the reality is, as most of us already know, our estrogen levels start to drop as we move into the menopause, and that has all kinds of different impacts on us, but one of those things that it will do is affect our bone density. So we need to think really carefully about that.
Could you tell us a little bit about calcium? Is that the only thing that we need really to maintain healthy bones, or are there other things that are affecting us, or we need to take to improve our bone density?
Well, that's a great question, because everyone thinks about calcium, and we're all sort of a little bit obsessed about taking calcium and worrying about calcium.
And also how to get calcium, because we tend to think about dairy products as being the main, or as we were growing up, milk, and that was what we should have, but there's other things as well.
Yeah, there are lots of things, but so let's focus on calcium first of all, because it's true that it is incredibly important for our bones, for our bone strength. But calcium can't work on its own. So in a minute I want to talk a little bit about how to make sure it's being absorbed correctly. But one of the things that you need to be aware of is that our calcium levels can be affected by what's going on with our parathyroid gland. The parathyroid hormone is one of its many jobs is to regulate calcium levels in the blood. Now, if calcium levels are low because for whatever reason you're not eating enough calcium-rich foods, or perhaps you have a diet which is depleting calcium, then the parathyroid gland will remove some of the calcium from the bones to redress the balance.
Just like a leaching of bones.
Exactly,
making them
possibly weaker.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as a one-off from time to time, if there's a quick dip in calcium, that obviously won't be a major issue. But if that's an ongoing issue of perceived calcium depletion, then the parathyroid gland will be working with your bones to deal with that. So there could be a lot of stuff going on in the background around calcium, which could be affecting things. So it's really important to understand that. But it's also important to understand that just stuffing yourself with calcium supplements isn't going to cut it, because calcium can't be absorbed without the help, first of all, of vitamin D. It's a gorgeous day today, and this is, I think it's what, 23, 24 degrees?
Yeah.
This is the kind of sunshine you'll really get vitamin D from. You know, your average winter sunny day won't do it. The sun's too low, even if it does look nice and bright. And it's important to understand that vitamin D can be found in very small amounts in food, but it is tiny amounts. And it's so important to our health overall in lots of different ways that Mother Nature decided that we couldn't just produce it ourselves, and the best way to do that is through exposure to sunlight. So making sure that you're getting plenty of sunshine is really important, but of course not everyone can do that, either perhaps because they can't, you know, for health reasons they can't leave the house, perhaps for cultural reasons they cover themselves up, or they may have a history of melanoma and be worrying very much and using full-on sunblock. So if that's the case, you know, I really would recommend pretty much all menopausal women to be taking vitamin D on a regular basis.
And you were saying the last time that a spray in the mouth is a very good way.
Well, it's one of my favourites.
Yeah.
Not least because it's peppermint flavoured, so I doubles up pudding. But also because you can put in 2 or 3 sprays and sort of vitamin D load, so that your body will store it and use it up over a period of time. Because vitamin D is one of the fat soluble vitamins, so you won't sort of burn through it too quickly. So you need vitamin D and calcium, and that's why very often if the GP is giving you calcium supplements, you'll get the two together in the form of something like Calci-Tube. But what everyone seems to forget is that you also need magnesium, because magnesium helps to convert the vitamin D that we've produced into the active form, and the active form of vitamin D is the form of vitamin D that actually supports calcium absorption. So it's like a really important trio for bone health, and really anyone who's concerned about bone health and who's looking to supplement, I'd really advise them to look for a good quality bone supplement that's got a few different vitamins and minerals in there, because that way they'll be working in synergy rather than you overdoing high levels of calcium, which can lead to other issues such as kidney stones. So you do need to be careful about just not going crazy for one single nutrient, because that's not the answer.
So when we started doing this, I have a friend who is on supplements, and she was diagnosed with osteopenia, and I've never heard of that word before. But basically, that is you're on a level where you've got high. You could possibly get full-on osteoporosis, and I think her grandmother had it and her mother has. So she's definitely trying to make sure she looks after her bones healthily. So I think she is taking all sorts.
So you advocate supplements in addition to diet, or if your diet is balanced enough, and I know that's really difficult to talk about, before you can get it all from your diet, apart from the vitamin D?
Yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, definitely you get it all from your diet. And if you're somebody who you have your regular checks and your bones are in good order, then just keep eating a good balanced diet. And I'll talk through calcium in a bit more detail in a second. But if you're someone who has been diagnosed with a problem, or you have a history of fractures, then it probably would be sensible to look at giving yourself a little bit of extra support, I'd say. But as well as milk or other dairy products, green vegetables are a fantastic source of calcium. And the great news is, of course, that they also are a brilliant source of magnesium. But those of you who love spinach need to be really careful, because spinach contains something called oxalic acid, and oxalic acid actually can block the absorption of calcium in the body, which is a great shame, because I love spinach and it's my go-to vegetable for
and
salad.
my spinach smoothie this morning hopefully was counteracted by broccoli I had last night. So
yes, well, it's everything in moderation.
I think it is complicated though, and I think what we don't want to be saying is,
don't cut that out.
Yes. I suppose do people have so much spinach that?
Well,
is there a portion that would be dangerous? I mean, who thought spinach was going to be dangerous? We learning so much on this journey. So that doesn't mean up the jam donuts.
No, and there's so many great things about spinach. And to be honest, it's my go-to vegetable for a salad. I absolutely love it.
That's good enough for us.
And I eat it most days, and I have to really think to myself, actually, let's just swap that out, so that I'm not having it every single day.
If it's good enough for Jackie, it's good enough for us then.
The other thing you need to be bearing in mind is what's going on with your digestion, because in order for the body to absorb spinach correctly, we need enough stomach acid. Now the stomach's a big bag of acid, and its job is to break down foods into their component parts into a sort of mushy substance known as chyme before it passes into the...
That's a new word.
chyme, chyme, like thick soup. If there isn't enough stomach acid there, then that can't happen, and that will start to lead to particles of undigested food passing into the small intestine, which can lead to all kinds of discomfort, bloating, etc. But what's really important in terms of bone health is that the hydrochloric acid in the stomach also helps to trigger the release of something called intrinsic factor, which the body needs to absorb calcium. So if you're someone who constantly struggles with reflux, indigestion, and you pump the antacids, then you need to be concerned, because it may well be that you're actually affecting the absorption of acid in your stomach. And unfortunately, as we get older, we're not so great at digesting things, and people tend to turn to antacids, even when perhaps they're not the actual answer for what may be going on.
So what should we be, if you're a woman who reaches for a non-branded antacid, what should they be doing?
Well, it's just definitely keeping a track on what's going on with
Food
your
diaries
bones.
then, maybe.
It's quite interesting.
Well,
my husband suffers terribly from acid reflux.
Right.
And he's cut out completely gluten. I mean, he's not gluten intolerant, but that has completely stopped it, and he's suffered for years. So,
I mean, that's interesting you say that. I work with a lot of patients who have had years of reflux, and it's turned out to be some form of food sensitivity. So that sometimes can be a cause. But the reality is that if you've been prescribed antacids, then or that you're a regular offer of them, you do need to be thinking about this. And I'd recommend any menopausal woman to make sure that she's keeping a check on her bone health as a result.
How do you check your bone health? What's the best way of going to your GP and
Definitely,
asking?
yes. The gold standard for bone health is a DEXA scan, which can really drill down into the fine detail. But you can also have a blood test which will look at the various hormone levels, which can indicate what's going on as well. But certainly, yes, absolutely.
How easy is it for the average woman to go to her GP and ask for a DEXA scan?
They're really expensive.
So you really need to think whether or not your parents or your mother suffered
No,
from
your
anything.
history.
Family history is
your
incredibly
family
important.
history.
Also your health history, for example, if you had chemo in earlier years, then that's a potential cause of osteoporosis further down the line. Other things that would put you at risk would be if you're a smoker, for example. Smoking depletes bone density by about 25%.
Wow.
Now we have written
to know
about that, but when you hear
Yeah.
somebody like yourself saying that, that's such
a
a
lot.
massive. Add that to a glass of wine. What are we doing then? Are we increasing the risk?
Well, you are, because if your alcohol blocks the action of the osteoblasts, what do osteoblasts do, Jo?
They build.
They do.
And I remember that being for building.
So yes, I mean, I'm not saying you can't ever have a glass of wine. Of course, I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is, if you've got into that little habit of having, a couple of glasses of wine every day, it's isn't it what they call the sort of middle class problem, where people are sort of just having a little bit every day, not binge drinking. So technically, it all seems safe and fine and dandy. But again, it's one of those things that over time could be affecting your bone health. So definitely, again, everything in moderation and something to think about. And sort of finally on calcium, what I should also mention is those of you who are looking to supplement need to consider the nature of the supplement. The most common supplement you'll get is called calcium carbonate. That's certainly the one you'll get on the NHS. Calcium carbonate is basically chalk, and it is hard to digest. Now, that's not necessarily a problem, but it really will depend on the individual. The reality is, as we get older, our digestion isn't as effective as it used to be. And if you're someone who's had constant problems of IBS or similar other problems, then you might want to consider investing in something like calcium citrate, which is highly absorbable and going to be much more effective as a potential supplement.
Can you just get that from a pharmacist or chemist? Or?
You can get that from any health food store.
Yeah.
It's more expensive. You do get what you pay for. I think it's time to move on to magnesium now.
Great.
I'm a big fan of magnesium. Magnesium, if magnesium were a person, it would be a super busy woman. It's the multitasker of minerals and does so many things. So, sort of one supplement to be taking, in my view, particularly for a menopausal woman, it would be magnesium. Absolutely, because it helps to relieve anxiety, irritability. It helps to support muscle function, so that if you've got tired, aching, stressed muscles, that will help. It helps to relieve constipation, calms the nervous system generally, relieves the stress response.
Sounds like our new best friend.
Well, I have to admit, on your recommendation with the Epsom salts, I have been doing that.
Yeah. And of course, as we just learned, you can't absorb calcium without magnesium. They work hand in hand, best friends. So, foods that contain magnesium, it's the dark green leafy vegetables. So, spinach, rocket, watercress, kale, cabbage, broccoli, brilliant sources of calcium. Brilliant sources of magnesium even. Brilliant sources of both.
Yeah. They're our best friend.
And whole grain foods, so brown rice, wholemeal bread, whole grain pasta, oats also tend to be a good source of magnesium. So making sure you've got plenty of those in your diet will help towards boosting magnesium levels. And the famous Epsom salts bath you alluded to, it's absolutely my favourite way of getting lots of sneaky magnesium. Particularly if you're someone who knows that green vegetables are a once a week thing at best. So 2 or 3 handfuls of Epsom salts in the bath, the magnesium will absorb through the skin, calm the nervous system, settle everything down, and really support muscle and bone health as well. And then the one really not to forget is vitamin C. I'm a huge fan of vitamin C. It does so many things, and it's super important to build up collagen. So without vitamin C we can't produce collagen, which most of us tend to think about for our skin.
Yeah.
Because you read about collagen supplements and collagen creams and goodness knows what. But collagen, as I mentioned at the beginning, is an absolutely fundamental part of the framework that supports the integrity of the bone. So without vitamin C we can't make it. Best source of vitamin C, most people tend to assume it's going to be an orange. And yes, of course, oranges and citrus fruit do contain vitamin C. But vegetables generally contain loads more. Red pepper contains 2 to 3 times as much more vitamin C per 100 grams than an orange. And green vegetables, again, fantastic source of vitamin C. So if you think about it with the green vegetables, something like broccoli, you're going to be getting calcium, magnesium, vitamin C, all the things you need to support your bone health.
Hence the Mediterranean diet, when you think about it, with all those red peppers.
It's important to remember that vitamin C is water soluble. So unlike vitamin D that I mentioned earlier that the body can stores it in the fat cells because it's fat soluble, vitamin C will be depleted by boiling. So if you boil your vegetables to glory, you need to be really careful about that.
Yeah.
So lightly steaming for sort of less than 5 minutes would be really the way to go, because then you're retaining as much of the nutrients as possible. Also important to know that things that deplete vitamin C include alcohol, stress, smoking. So again, if any of those apply to anyone in great amounts, then need to be careful about that, because that's going to be having an impact on bone health via the vitamin C issue as well.
So we've got calcium, magnesium, vitamin D, vitamin C. I think you said there were 5. Am I right?
Yes, the one lots of people forget about is vitamin K. If you sort of think back to school biology, you might think of vitamin K as a blood clotting vitamin, which indeed it is. But it's also incredibly important for bone health, because we need vitamin K to manufacture something called osteocalcin, and that's a type of protein that helps the calcium become really hard so that it makes the bones stronger and more durable. So we need to be making sure we're getting plenty of vitamin K as well. Once again, best sources of vitamin K tend to be vegetables.
Right, we're just not going to be bulk buying the greens.
No, the more vegetables you can eat, generally the better. What I tend to say to people about vegetables is if you can eat a rainbow of different colours across the course of a week, so that you're having obviously lots of the green, because we've heard how great they are for bone health, but also the red, the orange, the yellow, the black, and even sort of the beige ones, the things like celery and onion and garlic. All of those will give you different forms of vitamins and minerals and different forms of antioxidants, which will help in different ways. But also it just means that you're being more balanced about everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
What else have you got in your toolbox, Jackie?
Well, I think it's important to flag up a few things that might be causing problems, that might be affecting absorption, that might be affecting bone density. We've touched on a few of them. We've mentioned smoking, we've mentioned alcohol. it's important to know also that high levels of stress, chronic levels of stress, can affect your bone health.
And if ever there was a stressful time, it's menopause.
Absolutely, no, absolutely. Because high levels of the stress hormone cortisol will actually affect the function of the osteoblasts. Excessive levels of cortisol are what's called catabolic, so they will break down muscle. So anyone who's incredibly stressed and who's trying to build up muscle in the gym and so on will find that incredibly difficult. But also it will break down, or rather it will block the action of the osteoblasts that are trying to build the bone. So again, looking at calming activities, things that will support you through a stressful menopause are going to be important. And that's another reason to be focusing on the magnesium, because it calms the nervous system and helps things.
So also in terms of yoga and exercising also is incredibly good for your bone density.
It is, and I'll come on to that in a second. But the other sort of lifestyle thing to bear in mind is the impact of fizzy drinks. So fizzy drinks, even diet drinks, they contain, most of them, something called phosphoric acid, and that also can affect levels of bone density. So if you're someone who relies on those, perhaps as part of a diet, if you're worrying about gaining weight, just be careful not to be having them every day, because that could be something that in the background is.
And I think a lot of people do that because they think, I need to have something.
You think you're doing yourself a favour, and in one sense you might be, but not necessarily in another. So again, the moderation, one or two here and there aren't going to be a major problem. But if, I do work with some women who are having 3 or 4 cans of a diet drink a day, and over a period that's not going to be helpful.
No.
The other thing to think about is protein. We need protein. Protein is all about growth and repair of cells and bones. If you're not eating the right levels of protein, you're not going to have strong bones. But it's also important to know that there is a school of thought that suggests that too much protein can cause a state of acidity in the body, and may again therefore lead to calcium leaching from the bones to address the acidity. Now, the evidence base for this is up and down, and there's a lot of arguments about this going on right now. But certainly anyone who's on an incredibly high protein diet, again as part of a weight loss program, should probably think.
And that was what was going through my mind. There's so many contradictions here, isn't there? Because it's like, cut out the carbs, eat more protein.
And I think it's incredibly important, because while, to be honest, in my clinical experience, most women aren't eating enough protein. Having said that, any of the sort of major popular diets, things like the keto diet, where you're eating nothing but protein, probably not going to be helpful in bone terms.
No.
Because you really can have too much of a good thing. The other thing
So
to
in
consider,
terms of protein, what would be the best source to get the protein? Because obviously we've talked a lot about vegetables, but really that needs to be balanced with perhaps fish or something like that.
Great question. I think one of the things that you can do, if you are someone who eats a lot of protein-rich foods, and just for the record, protein, we're talking about meat, fish, eggs, dairy products, and then of course there's plant proteins, things like lentils, chickpeas, beans, nuts, seeds, quinoa. All of those are protein-rich foods. The good news is that the plant proteins generally don't tend to be acidic as such. So making sure you've got a balance between not just focusing on animal protein, but also having more plant protein, pulses, quinoa, and so on in your diet would be a good move. And generally speaking, the research suggests that if you're having protein, particularly meat, try and have it from beef from pasture-fed cattle, for example, is likely to be much better quality and far less acidic than something that's been factory farmed, as it were. So yes, eat plenty of protein, but think about the provenance of it, and make sure that you're having a good balance of animal and vegetable protein, because that'll be helping too.
Great. Is there anything more that our bones need?
Well, the final thing, which most people are already aware of course, is the exercise side of things, the weight-bearing exercise. Not just any old exercise, and sadly, much as I love it, things like swimming, they're just not weight bearing. Cycling isn't weight bearing, rowing isn't weight bearing, but good brisk walking is. Running, of course, is great. You don't have to lift weights at the gym if that's not your thing, but that kind of resistance work is very effective. But also worth knowing that things like yoga can be great, because yoga is all about using your own body weight for resistance. But that's not the yin yoga, the lovely yoga where you lie around on the mat and stretch. That's fabulous in lots of ways.
I do the Iyengar, which is all the stretching, and yes, I
So-
think that's more of a Pilates type.
Standing postures, ones where you're moving in and out of plank pose, and where
That is, but I hate that one. But it is very weight bearing.
it's very weight bearing. It's really great for your bones. Pilates is great because it's often a combination of strength and flexibility as well. Dancing, skipping, all of those things are great.
We've tried all of them.
Yeah.
We love a bit of a dance. We've done our skipping.
Well, that's great. And if it's never too late. So if you're somebody who hasn't really exercised all your life and you're starting to freak out, I mean, don't. You can still build up the strength
And
of
I
your
think
bones.
walking is just this, the start. If you can walk more and start building up,
And it's
your
an easy one to start with
exercise.
because actually it's
Yeah.
such a challenge for women who haven't done any exercise, who know in the heart of hearts they need to do something.
Yeah.
Don't go check out a costly gym membership.
No,
Don't go
absolutely.
and buy all the gear, no idea. Take yourself out for a brisk walk
Especially
and get your heart
when
rate
we're
up.
going into the summer and the weather's getting
For sure.
warm.
Time out for yourself as well and deal
It
with your
is.
stress.
But also it's important to start slowly in any case, because if your bones are a bit delicate and you want to build up the strength, it's not going to be smart to go into something that's very high impact, because you
Yeah.
could actually cause
Do
more damage.
Yeah.
So building it up slowly if you haven't had a particularly strong background in exercise, and then taking advice from specialist trainers and so on is probably the best way to go.
Brilliant. Well,
Great.
Jackie, thank you very much. If you want to get in hold of Jackie, it's well-well.co.uk.
That's it.
That's
the one.
Right.
Perfect.
Thanks very much,
Jackie.
Jackie.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.